My dad works in B2B marketing, but I never really knew what that meant. Then one day my dad came by my school for career day and told everyone in my class he was a big ROAS man. Then he just kept saying things like, the bigger the ROAS, the better, over and over. My friends still laugh at me to this day. I think it means calculating a return on ad spend. One thing's for sure, I'll be known as the ROAS man's kid for the rest of my days. Why couldn't you just be a fireman or a lawyer? Why? You ruined my life, Dad.
Not everyone gets B2B, but LinkedIn has the people who do. And with ads on LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people based on job title, industry, likelihood to buy, and more. Start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Looking to invest? Start your journey by exploring exchange-traded funds with Global X ETFs. Exchange-traded funds, or ETFs for short, create baskets of stocks, bonds, and other assets that you can buy in a single trade. Global X specializes in ETFs that track emerging trends, like the rise of artificial intelligence, as well as strategies aimed to generate income potential. Visit globalxetfs.com to discover how you can get started.
Welcome to Storylines Live, the only podcast that explores the power and the meaning of the most important story in business. The one that answers why somebody should buy from you, work for you, invest in you, or partner with you. This is the story that defines the very character and nature of an organization. At WordWrite, we call it your capital S story. In each episode, we feature guests who have great insights on business storytelling, who can share their experiences and key learnings to help you and your organization do a better job of sharing your capital S story to drive remarkable results. Today, we're honored to have Jason Lavender, who's a co-founder of Electives.io, as our guest. Jason, I love your bio on LinkedIn and digging right into the story. I think that's one of the things that so many business leaders, we don't do very well. You began your career as an actuarial intern at Towers Perrin. Towers Perrin, great company. Actuarial science. Wow, is that boring, but high paying. Maybe we'll talk about that today. I'm not really sure. And then you moved on from there after a decade. Great experience to work at a big firm in the industry, right? That was kind of my background too when I got into PR and marketing. Then you were at Boy Health for a while. Maybe we'll talk about that. Then as a glutton for punishment, you also started business school at MIT Sloan. Definitely not a slacker school in the business world pantheon. And you worked on healthcare navigation there, very important. And then went on to Next Gen Ventures as a health tech subject matter expert. Yeah, venture capitalists, they need to know what the deal is with these verticals, don't they? And then you went on to a few other things that led you to start your own company, Electives.io. And one of the reasons, the main reason, of course, Jason, I wanted to have on the podcast for our listeners is so they could learn about this transformational approach that you folks are taking to learning and development, because everybody agrees this is one of the most important things that needs to be done in any corporate environment, small company, medium-sized, large company, training and development. Instead of, you don't say training, you say learning and development, which I think is a great way talking about story, to talk about what you're doing. But how often do people go to a session, a course or whatever, and 3 weeks later, they forget everything they've learned. It's not convenient for them, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm really excited to dig into this with you today. Jason, welcome to Storylines Live.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Paul. Appreciate the introduction.
Absolutely. Now, in bringing your bio into the conversation, is there anything I missed in your background that you would like our audience to know about you?
No, I think you hit on all the highlights, and yeah, the you're spot on in terms of the boring start to the career. I often joke with people that the more actuarial exams I took, the less I liked my job. So it was an easy pivot to go from actuarial consulting to broader strategy consulting. But no, I think you hit on all the highlights.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I have to tell you a quick story about the actuarial sciences because we had the opportunity to work on developing the stories of an actuarial firm called Cowden and Associates here in Pittsburgh, where our firm is based. And it was really fun to dig in and talk to some of these folks. When we started to personalize the actuaries and the benefits that they brought to the clients, the story of the firm really came alive. I remember one of the principals we worked with was really big into motorcycles. And so he really understood speed and risk, but also before he completed college and became an actuary, he served in the U.S. Air Force and in the Missile Command. And he was the guy who had his finger on the button if the president, whoever, called down and said, "Uh-oh, time to launch the missile." And that really resonated with clients to know that this person who was highly trained and skilled in actuarial science was not the kind of person to just push the button at random, right?
Yeah.
So that's really a great thing. Now, we always ask our guests, Jason, when we have them on the podcast, for their own personal definition of where they are in the capital S story. And as I described it at the opening, it's the story that answers why somebody would buy from you, work for you, invest in you, or partner with you. For you, which one of those lands best for you today?
I think for me today, they're all pretty close, to be honest. I think the one that lands the most is why to partner with us.
Hmm.
Uh, I feel like we can't answer that question if we don't have people who want to work with us and invest in us. But I think the most common or frequent conversation we're having today is why partnering. So that's where I feel like I'm spending most of my time today.
Could you tell our audience a little bit more about that? Because what I'm getting from that, and tell me if I'm wrong here, is that you're looking to engage with the organizations you work with, not on a transactional basis, but over time to be a partner to them. Is that accurate?
It's absolutely accurate, yeah. And I think when we go back to our founding story of why did we even start Electives, my co-founder and I, we met in business school. We were both frustrated in our existing jobs with the training that we had access to. To your opening comments, it felt boring, it felt mundane, it felt very kind of check the box and very transactional. And we often tell this story, and I'll just jump right into it to come back full circle.
Yeah, sure.
Question. But there was a moment in business school where we had a surprise kind of guest lecturer come in, and he was in our strategy class, but his background was he was a mountaineer. So he had led, I think, 7 expeditions to the summit of Mount Everest, and he was teaching a decision-making framework, particularly for teams under crisis. But it was his storytelling and his imagery of, none of us had ever been anywhere close to the summit of Mount Everest. And so it really hit home from a learning experience.
Mm-hmm.
And later that day, my classmate, who's now my co-founder, and I were kind of looking at each other, and we were connecting the dots back to the earlier conversation of how mundane training can be. And we said, imagine if corporate training felt like that. Imagine if employees couldn't wait to be part of a learning session. They didn't want it to end. They wanted more of that. And ever since that moment, that's kind of been our North Star at Electives. It's really building training that people love and that they look forward to. And so to your point on partnering for kind of the long game, we're not trying to just sell a single class. We're not just trying to sell, 80% utilization in 1 month. We're trying to sell a partnership that lasts many years, that is constantly bringing new instructors, new energy to employees who we know are rotating within the business all the time as well.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about this a little bit, I am sure, and we talk more about what you folks do at the company. But let's just take AI as an example. I mean, that thing changes so fast. How can you say that in 2023 you took a class or did some training on AI, and in 2024 that it's all 100% accurate, right? Things are just moving too fast these days.
You're
Learning
totally right.
yeah,
You're
it's
totally
learning
right.
is lifelong. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you gave our audience a little bit of a sense of your personal story, what led you to found the company. Obviously, Storylines Live, it's our podcast. We have a particular definition of story. I'm always curious to know what your personal definition of storytelling is and why it's important to you.
It's a great question. I think I would define storytelling less of a one way and more of a two-way conversation that engages people in an important topic.
Yes.
I think it's subtly different than teaching. I think there's a lot of teaching that is done through storytelling, but I think there's also a lot of selling that's done through storytelling and a lot of other things that are done through storytelling. But I think the biggest thing for me is that it's bi-directional. I think as a kid, I would have thought of storytelling as one person's listening, one person's telling the story. But I think really good storytellers bring you in, whether or not you're talking vocally, you're in that story and you're truly living it.
Yeah, that is such a profound comment. And, my book is behind me, Finding Your Capitalist Story. And I have in one of the early chapters, it's more than 10 years old now, the experiment that I'm going to refer to here, but it's very much valid. Dr. Yuri Hassan at Princeton did research using functional MRIs, and he studied the brains and brain wave patterns of storytellers and then put people in the MRI to listen to the story. And what he discovered is that this is much more like dance and maybe not Dancing with the Stars, but dance partners, where the storyteller and the receiver of the story, their brains move in sync when things are working well. And it strikes me that that's probably a key component of effective learning as well, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Yeah, I think we always say there's no shortage of content. Like you can,
Yes.
whether you're taking a manager training or leadership development or a class on AI, to your point, you can find the content, but a really good storyteller brings that content to life, makes it applicable to you, makes it unforgettable, so that 2 months later you don't forget it. Because content is content. You'll forget content, but people don't forget stories.
That's for sure. I often say, Jason, that when the first person who figured out how to start a fire on purpose explained how to do it to the second person, it was probably a story. And
100%.
one with a happy ending, like, a really nice grilled steak or something like that, right?
I love it.
Yeah. Folks, we're speaking with Jason Lavender, co-founder of Electives.io, a landmark and really interesting company in the learning and development space. We're going to take a short break and we're going to come back and chat about the company, Jason's founding of it, and how they help those they serve. Don't go away.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Hennika Watkins-Porter hosts The Entrepreneurial You, empowering entrepreneurs with insights on leadership, business, and success. Hennika, tell listeners what to expect from your show.
So we provide innovative business strategies and practical solutions to common entrepreneurial challenges.
And where can people subscribe?
Find us at hennikawatkisporter.com, as well as the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcast.net, or search for it wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe.
Hi, folks. Thanks for being with us for this episode of Storylines Live, the only podcast that explores the power and the meaning of the most important story in business, the one that answers why somebody should buy from you, work for you, invest in you, or partner with you. In this episode, we're honored to have the co-founder and CEO of Electives, Jason Lavender, with us. Jason, for our listeners, can you give us a sense of how do you serve the people in the organizations that you folks work with?
Absolutely. So I would say most of our clients tend to be HR, chief people officers, heads of L&D. And the most common thing we hear from our customers is they're on very lean people teams. So it's usually like a people or HR team of 1 or 2, and they just don't have the bandwidth to do all of the things that they want to do. One of those things is roll out corporate training. And so there gets to be this kind of fork in the road for these lean people teams. And that fork is usually, do I create content in-house or do I curate content outside of the house? And our kind of hypothesis around the future of learning at work is more and more companies will curate content instead of create content. The reason why we think that is exactly to your point, Paul, around the pace of so much learning, whether it's AI or management styles or leadership development. It's incredibly hard to actually keep pace with that as a really lean people team. So to be creating new AI content, as an example, every single month, then all of a sudden you can't create manager training or anything else. And so we've found kind of the best people teams, partner with us to curate all of that content for them. And then we deliver training live, but over Zoom, so in a virtual environment.
So this is one of the things that I think is really interesting about what you folks do. Historically, training is delivered either on-site or off-site, but usually in person, right? The way you folks are doing it, I was reading the LinkedIn description for the company. 100 classes delivered live. Obviously, as you said, delivered over Zoom or Teams or whatever somebody may want to use. Tell our audience a little bit about that. That seems to me maybe to be something that was aided by COVID or maybe, caused by COVID, but it seems like such an obvious breakthrough.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the evolution just at a really high level that we saw in the corporate training space was, 2 or 3 decades ago, it was very much, to your point, classroom training. So it was everybody fly to a location, spend 2 or 3 days and learn together. And it's highly engaging, it's impactful, but it's very expensive. And you can't get all the people that you want to be there depending on kind of geographic constraints. So I think the next evolution was a lot of kind of pre-recorded e-learning. And the problem that those companies were trying to solve were improving access. So how do we make sure more people can access the learning instead of the 20 people who we all flew in for on-site? The problem that started to open up was the engagement challenge. So people weren't watching, those videos as much as companies wanted them to, and so they were the term that we started hearing was shelfware. Like instead of software, it sat on the shelf. And so I 100% agree that I think the pandemic and just companies moving to a remote hybrid workforce in general was a really nice tailwind to finally say, we know live learning works. We've known that for thousands of years, whether it was school or corporate training. However, if we can do it in a virtual environment, gosh, we can reach so many more people. And so when we first started the company, there was this real strong desire to just make virtual live learning more accessible to more people. And that, I think opened up significantly in end of 2020, 2021. To a point where I remember we had some conversations with partners and they said, yes, we want to solve the learning box, but we actually just want to solve the connection box as well. And there was a lot of folks who said, like, I don't want to do another Zoom happy hour, Zoom trivia night. It feels forced, but I do want my team to be together and interacting and being in breakout rooms. So learning became this kind of nice combo where you can develop people, but you can also connect people in a meaningful way.
Oh, that's great. That is, I think that's really a big breakthrough. Now, this is just me asking, but I would suspect that, like a lot of things in life, there are principles that come with leading people, other aspects of the training and learning that you might offer that could be considered core curriculum. So, I mean, is that what you folks have basically, or is all the training you do customized to every company?
There's 2 different models. So there are private classes that get customized for companies. I would still describe that as, 70 to 80% of the content is the content, but there's some customization on the margins that are knowing who the audience is, knowing what their industry is, knowing what the, success looks like. The instructors will shape that final 20%. And then there's what we call electives membership classes, which is really bringing employees from all of our different partners together to take classes in a live setting. Because of the nature and format of that, those are not customized because there's people coming from so many different organizations. But that's the typical kind of breakdown. What we don't do is we don't do compliance training, and we don't do very niche industry specific training. So if we're working with a biotech company, we'll do kind of the soft skills, power skills types of trainings, but we're not going to do any biotech specific type of training.
Right. So if there's, for instance, in biotech, FDA considerations to certain aspects, you're not going to get into that.
Exactly.
That makes perfect sense. Jason, what brings you the most satisfaction in the work that you do?
That's a great question. I think for me, so I have kind of a weekly ritual on Friday afternoons. I log into our platform and I just review learner testimonials from the week. And I think that just makes everything feel real. You kind of see all the numbers and quantitative data throughout the week, whether it's revenue or NPS data or whatever the metric may be. But when you start to read the qualitative comments, that really brings just a ton of joy for me. And it really doesn't matter what the class topic is. There's class topics that sometimes feel mundane, but they unlock something incredibly meaningful, either personally or professionally for that employee. And every once in a while, you'll see a comment that's like, I want to bring my son or daughter to the next class, which in my experience, I've never experienced a corporate training where I would typically subject anyone to it. And so the fact that they want to bring, family members or friends into that learning space, is just such a positive signal that they got a lot out of it, and they want others to as well.
That leads me to ask, Jason, can you just give our audience a sense of some of the class topics? I'm sure people are wondering, well, what kind of a class? It's not accounting management 101, or I'm making that up. Obviously, you probably don't teach that at all. But what sort of topics are you teaching?
Yeah. So there's over 530 classes on the platform. Again, they're all delivered live. And the really broad umbrella term that we often use is kind of power skills or human skills. So the subcategories that we think about are manager training. So effective feedback, accountability, delegation, things to just help you be a manager in 2024. There's leadership development classes, there's AI prompt engineering classes, there's design thinking classes, there's well-being classes, there's inclusive leadership classes. So there's quite the range of content. I think other than the compliance and the industry training, the two things that we don't do. The other thing I often say we don't do is like really tactical, how to use Microsoft Excel or something like that.
Yes.
And the reason being is we haven't found an instructor who can teach that in a way that is truly unforgettable. And so it doesn't feel like it fits the electives model. So yeah, wide range of classes. And then our instructors themselves are, former astronauts, former Olympians, Broadway performers, C-suite executives, a really wide range of people. And part of that was very intentional in the sense that we think employees show up to learn from people who are kind of outside of their daily orbit. And so we truly want to bring people who they may not have the opportunity to learn from, during their 9 to 5. But during an electives class, they can learn a new perspective on management or leadership from a really unique perspective.
That's pretty awesome. Can you share a success story or two for the audience? No need to use names if you don't feel comfortable doing that, but just to kind of give people a sense of what's achievable.
Yeah. One that's maybe there's kind of two that just are recent top of mind. So one was a smaller organization. They were about 100 employees, and they had no training and development at all at the company. And so they kind of grew from 20 to 50 to 70 to 100. Obviously, HR was doing a million other things. And so they got to that point where it was content creation or content curation. And like most companies, they did a focus group and employee engagement survey. And I remember the CHRO came back to me and said, here's the list of skills that we need to be competitive. And the list of skills was about 65 long. And so we said, all right, well, content creation, I think, is off the table. We cannot do that. And so we enrolled the entire company into that electives membership product. And within weeks, they had 50 to 75 live learning hours every few weeks. And so they really went from zero to a significant amount of development. And the best part was they could kind of put, salespeople in these classes and managers in these classes and new hires in these classes. And so that CHRO could look at the dashboard and just kind of use that as mission control and say, this is working great. Let's adjust these parts. But all with very, little work on their team. So that one certainly comes to mind. There's others that, do like week-long learning summits that always just get exciting feedback because it's such a commitment from the company. And a variety of others. But that one, just going zero to such a significant lift was awesome to see.
So you said a few things just now in the midst of sharing that great story that I think our audience would be interested in. So primarily you folks are working with organizations and chief people officers or human resources people, correct?
Correct.
And you also mentioned, Jason, a dashboard. And I really didn't dwell on this in my questions with you, and I want our audience to understand. So a big part of the benefit of working with you is you folks essentially have a platform, right, where everything is measured and tracked. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So we think of kind of the live classes as the core, but there's so much to do before and so much to do after. And so beforehand, one of the things that we always joke is when we show the platform, we say, look, there's 530 classes and there's kind of two emotions that come back. Wow, this is cool. And wow, this is overwhelming.
Yes.
And so on the front end, we provide all kinds of tools and resources to just help the business say, these are my goals. These are my employees. What's the best learning program that I should be bringing to my team? And so we actually help them roll out a strategy and a program. Right. And after the classes, there's learning nudges that go out to employees. There's an executive dashboard that they can see. Did people enjoy the class? Are people's behaviors changing? Do people attend the classes? All of the type of metrics that you would need. So it's a great question. I think we do often focus 90% on making sure the live classes are amazing. But live classes can't, ever get off the ground if we don't have the tools on the front end or the back end to support those people leaders.
And the platform then too, I would imagine, if I'm a chief people officer, and you gave the example of the one company, if I'm in the membership model, right, that's an annual contract or something like that, right? So I can continue to grow my people. If I bring somebody in who has 2 years of experience and they take A, B, and C classes, if they continue to work with you, at 5 years in, their needs might be different, and there could be classes for them at that point too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So every month in that membership program, we offer new classes, new instructors. So there is always kind of fresh content. There's definitely some classes that everybody's like, can you offer that again? Can you offer that again? And we'll drop it in, sprinkle it in future months. But they can always take new classes. And we also offer digital certificates in the membership program. So if employees take certain classes, they can earn manager essentials. And then, 2 years later, they can take leadership essentials. And there's always something for them to take. But the reason actually we named the company Electives was my co-founder and I both had this vivid memory when we were at Sloan. There was one period of time where it was like December 1st, we all got an email that said electives will be announced December 10th. And there was just this buzz for a week and a half, like waiting to see what those classes were going to be. And you could only pick one. And, it was really hard to narrow down that list. And so that's kind of that feeling we want to give people of every month we have new classes. And every month we hope it's hard to pick, only one, which is just, again, a different kind of mindset than your typical corporate training experience.
Yes. Anticipation rather than dread, right, Jason?
Exactly.
That's great. Jason, how can people find you if our audience is interested in following up?
Yeah. So at a company level, our website is electives.io. We're on LinkedIn. I believe it's just electives is kind of the page there. And then anyone wants to email me personally, I'm Jason at electives.io, and always happy to have any conversation around learning in the workplace.
Jason, thank you so much for being with us for this episode. I really enjoyed chatting with you about electives and your approach to learning and development. It's awesome. And I want to say thanks to our audience. I appreciate you being here with us for this episode and every episode on Storylines Live, the only podcast that explores the power and the meaning of the most important story of business, the one that answers why somebody should buy from you, work for you, invest in you, or partner with you. We'll see you next time.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.